Donald Trump secured more support from Latino voters this year than he did in 2020 when he lost to Joe Biden. Why did Trump gain a larger share of Latino voters, and why was that larger share most pronounced in men under the age of 45? Joining us now is Edward Vargas from ASU School of Trans-Border Studies. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
So what's going on here? More Latino voters than in 2020, not more than Kamala Harris, but certainly an increase in share. What's happening?
Well, first, thank you for having me on. And again, I just want to have a disclaimer that the views I share here, those are of my own and not Arizona State University or my funders who support my research. There are two kind of shifts, I think, that are happening. One, it's not that they're switch voting. A third of these of the Latino electorate are new voters. This is important. So as we're starting to collect data, precinct level data, looking at turnout, it's important to note that a lot of the data that's been released at this point have been exit polls. Now, we have to be very cautious with exit polls. One is that they're not reflective of how people are voting now. What I mean by that is that exit polls are when you go, you show up to vote, they are asked after you vote, who did you vote for? We know that the electorate is turning to ballot voting, early voting, so it's a whole different electorate. Of some election poll data that just was recently released by Unidos US show that the largest shift, like, as you said, is among those under 40 years of age, particularly men. Now, it's important to note that Latinos probably could have won Arizona and Nevada. They wouldn't have made a difference in the general election across the country. You couldn't win without Pennsylvania. You couldn't win without the Rust Belt. So our Latinos, some are going to Trump, but it's important to note that they're not necessarily going for Trump. They're voting for the economy, and that's really different.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Not even the economy so much as affordability. That seemed to be a top of mind for a lot of voters in general, but Latino voters especially.
That's correct. Earlier this year, you had me on the show, and as we were looking at the polls, Latinos were overwhelmingly saying that inflation, affordability, housing were the top issues that they cared about. And I said, if that's what's on the ballot this coming election, Donald Trump may win some of these voters. And so across the board, Latinos care about the economy. And here's why. It's not just that they care about the economy, but it's also about the sacrifices that their parents had to make. Their grandparents had to make, for example, crossing very dangerous places like the desert here in Arizona, risking their lives to come here and work. And so we would only expect the economy to be one of their most important pressing issues.
Let's get to the young men under the age of 40, 45, even under the age of 25. What's going on with that? Because I've seen the idea of hypermasculinity, especially for the younger ones, the younger men, and across all voting blocs, not just Latinos, but the younger men like a strong leader, may not be happy about a woman as president. Are all these things at play?
These are really important questions. I think what we also have to note that globally, we're watching this phenomenon. Across Europe, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing men take over positions through Europe, but we also see some differing trends. For example, in Mexico, which just elected their first president. And so this is, I think, a really important facet here about the Latino electorate.
Okay, the idea that, and again, criticism post-mortems done by Democrats on themselves here, saying that in many cases, the farthest left of the party, the far left of the party, defined too much of Kamala Harris's message, the Democratic Party's message, and much of the country just wasn't buying it. You buying that?
Well, I would say that I think this is really important to note that a lot of these young voters were hoping to see immigration reform. I think immigration reform and the Democrats not being able to act to legalize the 11.4 million folks that are living in this country undocumented. So they're not seeing results when it came to immigration reform, which is different than border security. I think these are two, because we ask Latinos, what do you think we should be doing about immigration? A lot of Latinos also say border security. Now, being pro-border security doesn't mean you're anti-immigrant. I think these are two mutually exclusive responses.
And yet, Democrats will tell you that they had something all ready to go out of Congress. Some federal, not perfect, but federal legislation was ready to go, and Donald Trump was the one who torpedoed it.
That's exactly right. What we're also finding in some of these polls are Latinos who don't see themselves as immigrant. In other words, yeah, maybe we should deport immigrants because they're not seeing themselves as immigrants themselves.
Interesting.
And which is kind of a second, third generation Latino response in some of our data sets.
Are men of color now becoming new swing voters? I mean, not beholden to any individual party and able to shift election by election?
I say it's candidate specific. I think Harris coming in so late didn't give enough time to people really get to know who she is. I do think the Trump administration and the Republican Party did a really good job of contacting independent voters. I know some independent voters that were pamphlets. 4 out of 5 times that they received something, they received GOP Republican ballots. So I think, pamphlets. So I do think that they did an excellent job. They went to places that they've never gone in the past. For example, at the end, they went to Trump went to New Mexico. This is unheard of for a Republican Party.
Last question here. What do we take of the exit polls? And granted, they're not perfect here, but certainly a lot of exit polls are showing the same thing as far as the Latino vote. What do we take from this?
One, we kind of expect turnout to be somewhere in between 2016 and 2020 in terms of numbers. It wasn't as historical as 2020. I think this kind of incumbent kind of referendum on incumbents is something that, again, not just seen here in the United States, but it's something that is seen across the globe.
Edward Vargas, ASU School of Trans-Border Studies. Good conversation. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.